No, I think it has become obvious in a South African context, especially with a shrinking budget, that much more careful planning and coordination is required, particularly around science. I think for a country which has limited resources, and I always have to remind people that there are huge socioeconomic issues that need to be dealt with by government, so that it's not only government that needs to find a way of doing a lot of this work. Civil society has a role to play. Citizen science has a role to play. Because if you're going to rely purely on government, it might not be such a great, you might not get the answers as quickly as you want to, but I think there's a role for everyone. And if I have to be honest, I think within a country like South Africa, like I alluded to earlier, the problem is generally not in the policy, but it is in the implementation that is the greatest challenge. So, for example, talking about enforcement, etc., it becomes a very, very sensitive issue because we've got quite a long coastline that needs enforcement. So, at the end of it, again, I'm going to say, just like the science that we need to do, it cannot be done by one entity only. And I think it's what was just said a little earlier. It's a collaborative approach to things, and I've thought about this DSI DFFE coordinating mechanism for a very, very long time and hard in terms of just how best we can achieve this with the limited resources that we have. So I think I'm hoping that with the start of the next financial year, which is April of 2025, this mechanism would be quite full up and running. And it's going to be dependent on a lot of people in this forum for their input, so that we address the right kinds of research that we need in order to make informed decisions. Obviously, I also state that there's space for all kinds of research. There's a place for academic research, which for blue sky, for applied research, for monitoring. And I think that should not be changed at all. But I do think, though, that a lot more effort is required, particularly in the long-term monitoring and the applied sciences. And we should not throw out so easily the social sciences aspects, because people's lives are at stake. And we have to respond to that at all times. So, and I think one of our greatest challenges as scientists is speaking to the local community. We can talk about all sorts of physics and mathematics to each other, but to the layperson in the street, that means nothing. So that science communication thing is extraordinarily important. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I suppose one of the challenges is enforcement at the local level. And as you were saying, the implementation often takes place at the local level and not at the national level, where you have the good policies. So how do you convince municipalities of the importance of the marine environment that they're in charge of?
Yeah, I think we've done quite a bit in terms of convincing the municipalities. There are fora by which the department engages with provincial and local governments, trying to set up. The issue will always be resources at the local level. It will always be people and financial and institutional. So in that way, I think one of the things that we've done in the most recent past was trying to set up this national a water pollution monitoring laboratory, whereby local municipalities can send their samples there for analysis, and then they'll get a report that comes back. I feel that when local or provincial fails to do things, there's a big reliance on national to step in and do what is needed to be done. But constitutionally, we have to do that very, very carefully, because we have a national role to play, and so does province and local government. So we don't want to be seen as overstepping our constitutional mandate. So a lot of co-management is needed. But again, the issue of resources will always be a problem, irrespective of what the problem, what the size of the problem is. Resources will always be it.
Yes, yes, indeed. That is very difficult. What about the fishing as a livelihood? You know, the fishermen are quite vocal, I think, about their rights, and they have to be, because it is the way in which they conduct their living. I think a whole culture grows up in a community around the fishing industry, in whatever size it may be. So I think these things are extremely difficult to address.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I don't want this to be a conversation between you and me now. But I think the fishing industry does employ a lot of people, whether it be the industrial or the small scale, and plays a very important role. But I think it's been something that we've been grappling for more than a decade with now, is how do you get people or present them with opportunities away from the fishing industry? Because it's a finite resource, it's a dwindling resource, it's a resource that is completely dependent on what the marine environment allows them to do in terms of reproductive success and so forth. I mean, we were talking earlier about issues of ocean acidification and all sorts of things like that. Changes in the marine biodiversity ecosystem as a whole. This is not within your control as a fisherman or as a government, because these things happen at a global level and impact you. The issue is, how do you then respond to this? And the fishing industry, as well as it is managed within the South African context, particularly deep sea fisheries, in terms of its sustainability, it is not a guaranteed sustainability, because the environment itself is going through lots of changes. Yes. And our fishing industry is not unique in any way. You go to any country that has a fishing industry, you will not satisfy anyone. You're not going to satisfy big industry, you're not going to satisfy small industry, you're not going to satisfy subsistence people, because one is going to impact the other in any decision that you make. So it's one of those things where we have to make a decision and then just hold our breath and hope that things will be better. But it's a legally fraught industry, and a major challenge to any government to find that balance between the sustainability of the industry, the protection and conservation of the environment, and then ensuring that those who have their livelihoods dependent on it is not impacted in any way.
Right.
No, it's a difficult job to do.
It seems like we need a just transition in that regard, like we have a just energy transition.
Yes, no, I agree with you in terms of yeah, in terms of a just transition, I agree with you. The problem is convincing those communities that there's something other than fishing.
Yeah.
So that's
Indeed.
that takes a lot of work. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. I think it was worth hearing your responses in that regard. Bernadette Snow says, comment in response to what Ashley mentioned and cleverly had in her slide is the need for transdisciplinary research, inclusive of other knowledge. We, however, need to build capacity and acceptance of co-produced knowledge. Indeed. Would anyone like to respond to that comment from Bernadette? No, it's a rhetorical statement. Another comment or question from Catherine Ward. Thank you very much for the excellent presentations, acknowledging the already complex social, ecological, marine environment of South Africa and resource constraints. Is there a need to expand management practices into wider marine systems? And how feasible are, for example, transboundary MPAs within the African context? Oh, good question. Who would like to respond to that? Ashley, I suppose you have to take that one as well.
Yeah, I can try. I think transboundary management has been quite effective along our west coast because there's a legal entity that has been set up, which is called the Benguela Current Commission between South Africa, Namibia, and Angola. So there's a co-management of common species in that space. In terms of protected or transboundary protected areas, I think there's a success story between South Africa and its neighbors for some time. The problem with oceans is that, you know, you can see an elephant and you can see a rhino. When you're starting to manage things you can't see, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And also, if the neighboring countries do not have the same level of legislative instrumentation, implementation, compliance, etc., it becomes, the onus then falls on one country more than the other, and it should be a co-shared thing. So that, I mean, it's not something that is new. It has been suggested and tried in many other instances. I can talk about the West Coast a bit more, but I take, for example, even iconic species that migrate between Mozambique and South Africa, such as turtles. They don't have the same level of conservation on both sides of the border. So you first have to do that. And while you do that agreement between different countries, as a country, you also need to know exactly what you have. And that's the problem. It's the problem right now. Systematically, we do not exactly know what we have in our EEZ. And until that happens, it's going to be very difficult. But then again, you have to make sure that your neighbor does the same thing. So I don't know what the solution is, but yeah,
we're having a new award next year. I might as well break the news of Science Diplomacy for Africa Award as part of the NSDF South 32 Awards, and I'm thinking that is an area in which science diplomacy would be very valuable indeed. Someone asked, are there regulations with regards to how much and how far can fishing practices be? Also, are these regulations speaking to the conservation of fish?
I'm not from the fisheries branch, but I can. Yeah, there are very strict rules and regulations around what you can catch, how you can catch, how far you can go, and where you can go. Of course, again, the fisheries branch follows what is called an ecosystems approach to fisheries, which means the sustainability and of the industry, but not only of the industry, but also the species is taken into account before they can decide who gets what piece of the pie. So the intention is there to ensure that not only the industry but the species remain at a level which sort of makes the population immune to being overfished and drop below a level of population that would not make it sustainable. So those things are there; they exist. But again, I'm going to say it's issues of implementation and enforcement.
Right.
That's a challenge. But I think South Africa does not have a problem with policy. We have some of the best policies in the world around these things. The problem is, how do we then enforce it? Try and get to a level whereby they almost self-police as opposed to being policed. That's utopia.
Yeah.
But that is something that we hope to aspire to. And I think the industry, by and large, knows that their income now and in the future is dependent on a stock population size that allows them to be there for many, many years. Because for you to overfish, you're actually just shooting yourself in the foot. So I think by and large, the fishing industry is very compliant and they do this thing. But you do have elements within each of these that probably does not think in the same way. And those are the ones that are the ones that creates the issues and the problems. So I can't say that the entire fishing industry is a bunch of rogue individuals. I think by and large, they know that their company's sustainability depends on them ensuring that there's a sustainable population for the next year. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that answer. Can we have a last word from the other three speakers, as far as I can see, who are present here? Prof. Andrew Green. Andrew?
Can see. Sorry, I don't have all that much to add, other than I have a toddler here in the office with me. But I think this has been a very worthwhile exercise in terms of hearing out the various disciplines and the various organizations that are involved within the ocean space and in the decision making. And in particular, exciting to hear, the developments with DFFE and just looking forward to the future, I guess.
Yes, looking forward to the future with your child there. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us. Jasper Knight.
Okay, yeah, thank you. No comments to make from my side. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Cloverly Lawrence.
Thanks. No comments per se, but just very encouraging to see all the work being done. And definitely looking forward to opportunities for, seeing the collaboration and transdisciplinary space. I really liked your suggestion about the just transition in the fishery sector. And definitely something we need to look into. And it's becoming more pressing as we try to balance, the needs of people with those of other elements in the environment that also rely on those fishery resources. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Cleverly. Thanks a lot. Nomfuzo Mkize says, Chair, I don't have a question, but a comment to say that the topic is so important. I have gained so much information today, especially regarding the research that is being done in the marine area. Climate change impacts our daily lives. It has a significant impact on agriculture as well. Yusuf Adam says, is it realistic and viable for coastal and fisheries communities to envision a future ocean and coast ecosystem, where natural marine plant and animal species are restocked. Compare Parlemun restocking and ranching as a fisheries management approach. That's a good suggestion, Yusuf Adam, thank you. Bernadette Snow says, great presentations, have to leave. Rose Gwampu SP Gwanfopi says, thanks so much for the deep and insightful presentations. I learned a lot. Thanks so much, NSTF.